Hello, everyone. I wish I could be there to join you in person to say hello to some very good friends of mine in Hamburg and to meet all of you and have these conversations in person. But at least I can contribute something, I hope, from here in the United States. Um, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about why I was so excited to hear about this conference taking place. Now, my experience in not just the animal rights movements, but so many other radical social movements, we often tend to focus on our differences rather than the organizing potential that we all share. And I think part of that is natural. When we're talking about ideological critiques of power, of capital, of how people are exploiting the planet, we obviously want to advocate for how we see the world and the change that we want to see happen. But I think too often in these movements, we focus on the very small differences we have between each other. We try to divide up our critiques into the most perfect possible sense, rather than appreciating that what we really have in common across, whether you are vegetarian or a meat eater, whether you are a anarchist or liberal or a socialist, what we all have in common are these systems of power that are destroying the planet, destroying our health, and destroying non-human animals as well. And it's frustrating and I think debilitating to focus so much energy on these internal divisions and attacking each other rather than trying to build a strong, interconnected social movement that can challenge these institutions. So that's why I was so excited to learn about the ongoing work in this new conference that's taking place in Hamburg, because I think this is where we all have to be going. If we've seen anything, for instance, in the United States in the last couple of years, it's that the corporations, fascists, people in power are consolidating their interests, and they're working across political differences in new and very dangerous ways. And if we're going to be successful, or if we're going to challenge these people around the world, we have to be willing to do the same. Now, fundamentally, I think we have to understand the nature of neoliberalism and global capitalism. Specifically, these corporations have no national boundaries. They move internationally to pursue profits, to set up and expand industry, and with that, they bring their destructive practices, specifically in the meat and dairy industry, as I'm sure you all are talking about at length at this gathering. It's among the most destructive industries for climate change, for abuse of workers. For instance, there have been multiple investigations here in the US that have shown the use of slave labor, of exploiting immigrant populations and refugees. In addition to that, being incredibly dangerous and violent industries that show no regard for humans or for animals. And of course, we can't talk about these industries without the unimaginable toll they're taking on non-human animals. Just in the United States alone, for example, there are upwards of 9 billion animals killed every single year for food. And when you think about it, to create and to process and kill that many animals, you have to have a system set up that shows no regard for any aspect of life. That the workers who are mutilating these birds coming down the assembly line are being pushed to do more and more in even shorter amounts of time. Now, I know for many of you this is, of course, something you've heard many times before, but I would like to add an additional element to this, grounded in my particular work. My career has been spent focused on political repression and how social movements are criminalized and how those tactics have been spreading internationally as well. And that's in fact how I met my dear friends in Hamburg originally, because we were talking about how these efforts to label protesters as terrorists are showing up in many other countries. Now, when you think about it, this completely makes sense, because as corporations travel internationally, they're able to bring all of their, not just industrialized tactics and machinations, but in addition to that, they're able to bring these tactics of repression. On a more positive note, however, one thing I've seen repeatedly in my work over these last 20 years is the power and potential of social movements when we come together and work across differences. So for instance, here in the US, there have been a series of new laws that make it illegal to take photographs or video of animal cruelty on farms. That applies to workers, it applies to journalists, it applies to animal rights and animal liberation activists, food safety advocates and whistleblowers. It applies to everybody. And as a result, there's been a really powerful coalition that has come together that includes human rights groups, animal liberation groups, workers groups and unions, labor unions, environmental advocacy groups, and many others. And these are not groups that have often worked together on many issues, to put it mildly. These are organizations that often have very serious differences in how they're viewing the world, the types of tactics and advocacy that they're using. But nevertheless, I think it's been really inspiring for me to see how these organizations and individuals have still come together. And it's been successful. As a result of those coalitions, there's new awareness about these issues like never before. Several of these laws have been struck down as illegal and unconstitutional. And that type of change and that type of exposure to these issues would not have been possible if all of these different groups were working alone, separated from each other. So to me, it's been, in some ways, a model for the potential that we have often not acknowledged within ourselves. I know these types of conversations that you all are going to be having at the conference can sometimes be antagonistic. You know, they can be uncomfortable. And I think it's important to remember that the purpose of a gathering like this is not that everyone needs to walk away being the same person. You don't have to walk away thinking the same thing about every political issue. What I would strongly encourage you to do over this conference is to try to listen to what your colleagues are saying, to try to learn new perspectives, and instead of thinking about why they might be wrong on one small issue you disagree with, instead focus on the huge amount of issues that unite all of us. In particular, the destruction of global capitalism, the overwhelming power of the meat and dairy industries, and the tragic toll it is taking on humans, including workers, animals, the environment, and for all of us to unite around these common enemies rather than focusing on our differences. In that spirit, you know, it's really, I'm remiss, I wish I could be there with you all, because this is where my heart is right now, especially with the turmoil we've seen in the United States in the last year. I really can't overstate how shocking it has been to witness here in the U.S. And to me, this has been a change in my thinking as well, that, you know, we have to, if we're going to survive, if we're going to fight back effectively against these growing fascist movements, fight back against the unification of global capitalism, we have to do exactly what you all are undertaking at this conference. which is to work around shared goals, to be ambitious, and to step outside of our comfort zones and our typical social networks, so to speak. So in that spirit, thank you all so much. Hopefully I'll be able to meet you in person one day soon, and love and solidarity to my friends in Hamburg.